Week 1 has come and gone, and the fantasy football season is officially underway. And it would not be more fantasy stock exchange of us to not bring you guys a ton of trade targets, because you guys know that me and Danny are sick degenerates who trade constantly. In fact, the Flock League vlogs that we've been doing, me and Danny are the only ones to have made a trade, and we both made it with Mason. I just made one today. This is going to be a ton of fun. And spoiler alert, one of the guys that I traded for today is actually in this video, and he is on the thumbnail of this video. So we should have a ton of things to talk about here. We're going to be talking about 3 buys each, two sells each, and then a couple honorable mentions that we want to go through. Danny, let's get right into it. Who's your first buy?
Yeah, my first buy is probably a guy that went in the top 15 of your fantasy drafts. At the very minimum, went in the second round of your fantasy drafts. He went a lot higher in the NFL draft. He went in the top 5 overall picks. We have Marvin Harrison Jr., wide receiver of the Arizona Cardinals. And he didn't have the game that many were looking for in that first week. 1.4 PPR points. Not really that consistent dominant factor that we had him labeled as being coming into the season. But if you look at the underlying metrics of Marvin Harrison Jr.'s performance, it tells a lot more of a positive picture. Again, bad overall numbers, but you're still getting the wide receiver 1 overall on a good team thesis. We believe that the Cardinals offense can be one of the better performing units relative to expectations in the league. 28 points on a very solid Bills defense in week 1. And like I said, Marvin Harrison Jr. was running 95% of the routes for this team. The thesis still remains intact. That's going to be a common theme. If you had a thesis coming into the season of how a player's overall outlook would end up materializing, just based off of 1 week of production, you can't say that that's automatically going to pay off, or it's automatically not going to pay off. What you have to look towards is the usage. Marvin Harrison Jr. got the wide receiver 1 overall usage. And if he is the level of talent, the number 1 graded prospect in the FSC prospect model, he's going to be able to live up to it. So with Marvin Harrison Jr., you really just need him to start playing better. Again, it's a rookie wide receiver, first career game. Maybe that's on me a little bit, having a little bit higher expectations for him going into that first game. Because even if you look back, like Justin Jefferson in the first couple of weeks, a little bit slow coming out of the gate. If Marvin Harrison Jr. plays up to the level of talent that he has at his disposal for what we saw from this Cardinals team being able to throw the football down the field, I think that he can very well still live up to that expectation as a wide receiver 1 in fantasy. And he's someone that's being depressed because of how bad his first game was.
Yeah, if you guys were Marvin Harrison faders because he's a rookie and he hasn't proven it yet, go ahead and take your victory lap, but don't stick to your priors completely, because now Marvin Harrison is at a point where he's actually affordable and you don't have to spend top 15 overall asset and fantasy prices to go and get him. Because like you said, the Cardinals right now are going into this week 1.5 point favorites over the Rams. Like, the Vegas kind of knows that this team is a little bit better than people think. And getting the number 1 receiver for this team is going to be an effective thing. And realistically, there's nothing that we can say to justify his week 1 performance from a target standpoint, from a, like, he was one of the lowest graded receivers in the league in terms of separation score and PFF receiving grade, yards per route run, and things of that nature. He just has to play better. And he's a rookie and he was in his first NFL game. And I do believe he will turn things around. When you look at some of the deals per our Flock Fantasy Trade Finder, which is a tool that is available on our site, you can get access to it, linked down below in the description. Marvin Harrison's going for Tony Pollard, Tank Dell, and Keon Coleman. I mean, DK Metcalf, I think that's a little bit more of a fair trade and probably something that's more comparable in like a sharper league. But I would still personally rather have Marvin Harrison, hoping for like a bounce back. I think by week 2, week 3, week 4, this is going to look like a ridiculous overreaction.
Yeah, and I mean, we'll get to DK in a second, because spoiler alert, he will be my second buy in this video, but I'm not buying DK for the price of Marvin Harrison Jr. There is still levels to this. I mean, with Marvin Harrison Jr., like we said, we've been tinkering with our rest of season rankings. He's still a guy I'd be comfortable ranking as a wide receiver 1, with the hope that he can get back to that prospect level. DK Metcalf, as much as I like him, he's still more of a, mid to low end wide receiver 2 profile. So if you can make this move, people love the proven DK Metcalf. I'll talk about the positive about him in a second, but I would easily make this trade.
Yeah, and I think generally speaking, you're going to hear a lot of wide receiver trade targets in this video because of how down the passing game was in the first game of the season. We talked about it on our recap stream, but like the passing yardage, passing touchdown output, historically low. And that's something that I absolutely think will correct itself. Let's move to a guy in my first buy of this video here, whose offense performed extremely well in week 1. He just didn't have any production as a result of that. And that was Chris Olave of the New Orleans Saints. The Saints offense put up a real functional performance this week. They were so good. They absolutely destroyed the Carolina Panthers. And not only that, this is the part that makes me really excited about Chris Olave. Number 1 in pre-snap motion in the first game of the season, 3rd in play action. They were both dead last, respectively, in both of those categories last year. So with Clint Kubiak coming in, this offense performed at a pretty high level. Derek Carr was actually the highest graded quarterback per PFF passing grade. Again, maybe that's Fugazi because you don't like PFF grades, but at the very least, he performed well and he was pushing the ball downfield. The Panthers defense isn't terrible, and they absolutely destroyed them. 47 points on the board, 2 catches for 11 yards is not what you hoped for out of their number one weapon. So that is a discouraging kind of thing with Chris Olave, but he has a 27% target share as a rookie, 25% target share last year, top 20 receiver in fantasy points per game. He is going to have better weeks than this going forward. He's still the number one here. He ran the most routes. He's going to have the most targets going forward, and you can get him right now for a discount. Like some of the trades that you can see in our trade finder is, Puka Nacua, Najee Harris for Chris Olave and Zeke. Again, depends on where your team is at, how good of a team you think you can have. But if you need the production right now, I like the Olave side of that. I mean, if you can get him for Jerome Ford, that's an absolute steal. If you can get him for Zach Moss and Zay Flowers, that's an absolute steal. Those 2-for-1 deals where you take a lesser wide receiver like Zay Flowers or George Pickens or Amari Cooper or somebody like that, add in Zach Moss or some RB3 type, go get Olave for that.
Yeah, I mean, we also see this one, CeeDee Lamb plus Olave for Breece Hall, J-Mo, Jonathan Brooks. Maybe Jonathan Brooks wouldn't be able to get that done in your league. Maybe you add in like a Brian Robinson who had a good week one performance. This may also be attainable because Breece Hall, CeeDee Lamb, virtual wipe each other out. And then you're adding like Brian Robinson to a guy like Jameson Williams who had a good week one to go and tier up to Olave. So a lot of easily structured deals that you'd be able to make here. The one thing I will say with Olave is this is going to be a common theme in this video. I'm going to be talking about the offseason thesis we had for a lot of these players. What were the expectations? How we expect them to pay off? With Olave, his offseason thesis was that he was an extremely talented player that commanded targets, but was in a terrible offensive situation. He has one blip on the radar game where he doesn't command targets, but everything else we see from the situation almost goes completely the opposite of what we expected coming into the year. We thought this would be a bad, old school type of offense like we saw under Dennis Allen in the last couple of years. With Clint Kubiak coming in, this was your new age motion offense. This was your new age, Mike McDaniel, Kyle Shanahan, and go figure, he literally comes from the scheme, so it makes sense. We love seeing motion. We love seeing the pace of play. Heck, going up against the Cowboys defense that literally held the Browns to 17 points and probably should have been 10 points if you watched the whole flow of that game. We're dominant in that game. There's a 46-point over-under at Dallas this week. Vegas is respecting that the Saints can put up points this week against arguably the best defense in the league. And again, maybe you're worried about the matchup. You want to wait to see, maybe he has a bad game. I can get him for even cheaper. But the point is, I would actually get active now because there's a very real possibility this is a sneaky shootout spot between the Cowboys and the Saints this week.
Yeah, and even if the fantasy production is not great for Olave this week, I'm willing to bet that he'll have 8 or 9 targets at the very least. And then in sharp fantasy leagues, the window is going to probably close on Chris Olave. But like you said, I mean, the sharps are on the over in this game, 85% of the cash on the over in a
I agree with it.
Point over under game. Like the Saints can put up points, based on what we've seen so far. I'm not willing to say that they're going to be one of the best offenses in the league after one game and against the Carolina Panthers, who were a complete no-show in that game. But at the same time, it looks like they're going to at least be kind of like a league average offense as a baseline.
Yeah, like people might expect, the Cowboys, the way they looked in week one, that this will be like a 21-17, 24-17 game for the Cowboys. Like, I honestly think it's much closer. We see like a 31-24, maybe like a 34-28 type of game. Obviously, the Cowboys are favored. I do expect them to win, but the Saints should not be slept on. Their offense, based off what we saw in week one, is moving completely different to the last few years.
Yep, absolutely. So, Danny, who is your number 2 buy? You kind of teased him already.
Yeah, we alluded to him earlier, but DK Metcalf, wide receiver of the Seattle Seahawks, is my second buy going into week 2. And it's very similar to Marv, like I see it. The thesis for DK Metcalf paying off still remains intact. But the reason why we were drafting DK Metcalf is that he was the number 1 wide receiver in a Ryan Grubb offense that was top 10 in deep pass rate and top 10 in pass rate over expectation last year with the Washington Huskies. We were hoping that the innovative Ryan Grubb would increase the overall value of targets in the Seattle Seahawks offense. And unfortunately, he just got the Patrick Surtain blanket treatment in week 1. Like we saw per Seth Walder, Pat Surtain lined up opposite of DK Metcalf on 24 of DK Metcalf's 25 routes. But not every game is he going to go up against arguably the best cornerback in the NFL, future Hall of Fame level talent in Patrick Surtain for literally 99% of the plays he plays on offense. So if you can buy him low, maybe people are saying, same old DK Metcalf, volatile wide receiver. I don't want to be targeting him. Again, he's going to face some very easy corners relative to what Pat Surtain brought to the table.
Yeah, the highest paid cornerback in the league. Shocker. If you play against him on 99% of the snaps, not only are you probably not going to have a great game, but also Geno's not going to be likely to throw you the ball too. That's the other part of like shadow matchups that people tend to forget sometimes is that quarterbacks don't want to throw at you when you have that talented of a corner on you. And you could see some of the deals like take two guys that have a good performance in week one, Isaiah Likely and Zach Charbonnet,
Love
go
that.
after DK Metcalf. J.K. Dobbins and DK Metcalf for Chris Olave. Again, I wouldn't, like Metcalf for Olave straight up, I wouldn't do, but if you're getting Dobbins on top of it, I think that's a fine move. DK and Ramondre Stevenson for Calvin Ridley, J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards, I think is a good move. So there's definitely, treat him as a wide receiver too. That's what he is. He's a high-end wide receiver two at best, low-end wide receiver two at worst. And if you can get him for less than wide receiver two price tags by using a wide receiver 3 and an RB3 to go after him, like you kind of see in some of those deals, that's what we always preach around here. Get better in your starting lineup by using the depth that you build out.
Yeah, exactly. Like people are going to look at and see, Tyler Lockett had 6 catches for 77 yards. And people might assume, well, is Tyler Lockett back? Like he had a bad couple of years, but maybe he's just the Tyler Lockett we saw dominate in fantasy in years past. And it was mostly just the product of the offensive overall game flow. This was a team that was running the football, hitting that play action. Tyler Lockett being that vertical slot was able to come down with a couple of grabs, but the thesis, like I said, I still think Tyler Lockett is a player on the decline. While I believe in JSN didn't have quite the step we saw in week one quite yet, I still think DK Metcalf is the clear wide receiver 1 on an offense I really believe in.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's not much else I need to add to that. Let's get into Amari Cooper, who is my number 2 buy here. And the reason that we're going to talk about him is because I just traded for him in our Flock League. If you guys are not following along with the vlog that we've been doing, definitely
some of the best content on YouTube.
Exactly. Definitely check out the link in the description to go over to that channel. Amari Cooper, let's just talk about him as a buy first. Few accurate balls away from having a massive game. I get Watson looks like a complete train wreck. I don't disagree, and I just traded for the guy. Generally, I'm kind of bearish on this Browns passing offense in general. However, David Njoku is probably going to be on the mend for the next couple of weeks. He's dealing with a high ankle sprain. We know that that's relatively a 2 to 6 week injury, depending on how quickly you can come back. The Browns play the Jags, the Giants, and the Commanders the next 3 games, all of which were bottom 12 defenses against fantasy wide receivers last year, and all of which had bad performances in week 1. You think the Jags, they allowed huge plays to Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. The Giants allowed a big game to Justin Jefferson. The Commanders, pretty much every Buccaneers receiver could score against them. So those next 3 games are going to be crucial for Amari Cooper and this Browns passing offense to get back on track. Not every week are they going to have neither of their offensive tackles going up against the Cowboys pass rush. So I feel a lot better about the Browns than I think a lot of people do. I'm reacting to it, but I'm not overreacting to it. And Amari Cooper, too, had the 7th or 8th most expected fantasy points in week 1 when you look at establish the runs chart here behind Cooper Kupp, Tyreek, and some of the other guys. Cooper got targets. He got targets downfield. He got valuable targets. They just weren't accurate. And again, I don't think Watson's a great quarterback. I don't think he's going to have a great season or anything, but they're going to be better than they were against the Cowboys, in my opinion. And the trade I made with Mason that I'm referencing here is I got Amari Cooper and Justice Hill in exchange for Hollywood Brown and Javonte Williams. I needed wide receiver help. Hollywood Brown, I also have Kelsey and Mahomes, so I was kind of relinquishing some of my Kansas City Chief exposure to that as well. I'm going to be a little bit weaker at running back going forward, but I feel pretty good about Amari Cooper, man. I think he's one of the few guys that you can get wide receiver 2 production for not wide receiver 2 prices right now.
Yeah, and you juiced out, the $5 fab. I know Ryan Brolo's probably looking at that trade, really excited that you're able to squeeze some fab. But yeah, all jokes aside, I mean, Amari Cooper was probably in the most unideal situation, other than like the Panthers and the Giants in week 1, because Watson just simply didn't look like himself. Now, I understand that people may be saying, well, again, if he didn't look like himself, why am I going to buy into this offense? The Cowboys defense tends to do that against inferior competition. If you guys didn't pay attention to last year, unless the Cowboys defense is facing a bona fide top 5 offense, this is the effect they have. You're without your 2 starting offensive tackles against arguably the deepest edge group in the NFL, led by Mike Zimmer, who some of the stuff they were doing up front against this backup offensive line, like I really truly feel bad. Like DeJuan Jones, I want to say, had like 5 false starts going against Micah Parsons. Like he was terrified for Parsons to get off the jump quicker than him. It's just the Cowboys defense came into Cleveland and dominated them. And they're going to do that to a lot of teams. So with Amari Cooper, again, he also had 9 targets, 170 air yards in this game. Heck, Deshaun Watson missed him. I believe it was a 0 blitz by Dallas. Deshaun Watson's backing up. Missed him on a wide open boundary ball that would have been a touchdown. Like if Amari Cooper scores that touchdown, we're not talking about him today.
No, exactly. It's a pretty easy buy for me because the price point is that where you can take Brian Robinson or Jerome Ford or some of these guys that are kind of fringe RB2, RB3 production guys, wide receiver threes that had good weeks, you could probably package up to get to Amari Cooper. He's a very viable wide receiver 2 for me rest of the season. Even if the Browns offense is not expected to be very good, I still think the target commanding ability that he has, the player that he is, and the fact that Njoku's going to be out the next couple of games too. Like, you guys know how we trade. Like, I trade to make a profit sometimes, not necessarily to hold that guy for the next 16 weeks of the season. Amari Cooper as a trade candidate is a guy that over the next 3 games, like I said, could just go up in value and you could flip him at a later point in time.
I mean, it's pretty simple. If you guys follow the economy, multiple little gains result into big profit in the long term. So if you can buy Amari Cooper at his lowest, he ends up having a 23-point performance, and you can sell him instead of a wide receiver 38 price tag that his market currently is maybe today for a wide receiver 23 price tag, you're instantly profiting. And that's what we're looking to do. Again, not every single trade you're going to make is going to be a home run. Although I will say, if you did pay attention to week 7 or week 8's trade targets video last year, we put on Jahmyr Gibbs and Rachaad White, and they ended up being home runs.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So who is your number 3 buy? And we'll try and wrap these up in the next couple of minutes so we can get to some sells as well.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking of home runs, I do think that he is the home run swing that we need to be taking right now. James Cook, running back of the Buffalo Bills, we saw him take an even further step up in his usage under Joe Brady. I mean, we saw, weeks 10 to 18 last year, once Joe Brady took over after the Denver game, James Cook was the number 1 running back for a top-end Bills offense. What we saw from week 1, he even took a further step up in his usage. As you guys can see on the screen, in week 1, 68% of the rushing attempts, 47% of the routes, 21% targets per route run. And the biggest factor, which I'll get into, is 100% of the inside the 5 touches. For reference, last year, when James Cook was averaging 16.4 PPR points, being a true running back 1 down the stretch, those numbers were as follows: 49% of the rushing attempts, 43% of the routes, and most importantly, 15% of the inside the 5 carries. I understand Josh Allen is the one that scored in this game, had a rushing touchdown in this game. But the fact that out of the running back carries, James Cook was the one they were leaning upon to score those consequential points inside the 5 is a different development than what we saw last year. And the reason that we were in on James Cook is that he was a very efficient running back that can catch passes in a very good offense. The biggest question mark we had coming into the year is that, would he get the inside the 5? Would he get the red zone usage? The fact that he had 100% of the inside the 5 carries, despite them adding Ray Davis, despite obviously Josh Allen being such a focal point inside the red zone, is truly remarkable going forward. Again, he only had 13.3 PPR points. And I understand that's not a low enough total to make people press to just sell him instantly. But basically what I'm trying to say is 13.3 would align with people's thoughts of him being an RB2 coming to the year. I think he's got the opportunity to be a mid-range running back 1 moving forward.
Yeah, exactly. You want to tether yourself to that offense. They looked really good, which is also kind of a development that we didn't 100% know. Like, they were a top 2 offense in EPA per pass play this week, with Curtis Samuel basically doing nothing. Like, Keon Coleman in his first NFL game, Khalil Shakir obviously made some contributions. They spread the ball out. Josh Allen did his thing. He elevated the play of everybody around him, like we all knew he was capable of doing. And James Cook could be the guy that becomes the focal point of this offense. That's essentially the thesis for why we're buying James Cook.
He had 22 opportunities in this game. Like, he was a bell cow running back. Like, I'm sure if he punches in one of those touchdowns from those inside the 5 carries, he's an almost untouchable asset. Like, I have him viewed as a top 25 overall player moving forward. And if people are still holding on to that, 3-4 turn, 4th round valuation, he's such an easy click to buy.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of the Buffalo Bills, my final buy is Dalton Kincaid, his teammate, who had also excellent usage in week 1. He just didn't get the targets. Now, obviously, you want to see that going forward, because the biggest question we had about Dalton Kincaid was, is this guy good enough to be an elite tight end? Because we all knew that it was probably likely that he was going to be the top tight end on this roster. And it was probably likely that he had a chance to lead this team in targets. Dalton Kincaid didn't have to worry about Dawson Knox in week 1. 83% of the routes is exactly what you want to see. The average depth of target in like kind of the mid 5 range. Again, you want to see him a little bit higher than that. But with Dalton Kincaid, you're hoping that he can become an elite difference-making tight end. Game flow was kind of weird in this game. If you watch this Cardinals-Bills game, it was short field, special teams plays, Josh Allen doing it himself. Just an odd set of circumstances. And I just think it was one of those blip on the radar week 1, throw it out after this game is done. Because again, I don't think Dalton Kincaid is necessarily the best tight end in the NFL, but all he has to be is a top 10 tight end in terms of real life talent. And he has a chance to be a top 5 guy, because the thesis, as we've talked about throughout this video, has not changed. Dalton Kincaid, If anything, it actually got a little bit better because the offense looked really good, like I said, and Curtis Samuel wasn't a big part of it. So if Dalton Kincaid can come out and be the number one target on this offense, or at least be a top 2 target in the passing game, he has a chance to be a really good option. If you can trade for him right now with some of the deals per our trade finder, you got Dalton Kincaid and Malik Neighbors for McConkey and Stevenson. That would be a great move to make. Dalton Kincaid and Ayuk for Evan Ingram, DJ Moore, and Greg Dortch. Great type of moves. Again, 2-for-1s, 3-for-2s, where you're giving up the inferior assets for the better assets, but you're giving up more assets. We talk about these all season long. It's exactly what we love doing in a lot of trades. It's precisely what I did in the Cooper trade. The only reason I got Justice Hill in that deal was because he needed to drop somebody. And I just said, hey, give me Justice Hill because I need running back help. I would have been willing to do that trade, Hollywood Brown and Javonte Williams straight up for Amari Cooper. But I got Justice Hill in that deal because I needed running back help. And I'm kind of weak at the position right now, especially if Achane doesn't play on Thursday.
Yeah, especially knowing he also put a few bucks into Justice Hill. You obviously get $5 there. It's basically the trade you made. Obviously, you're content doing the 2-for-1 for Amari Cooper, but you also profited like $8 fab pretty much.
Yeah, pretty much. And I didn't have to go out and spend more money on the waiver wire to get running back production. I did get Jeff Wilson for $8 fab last night. So I was able to recoup pretty much or most of what I spent on Jeff Wilson. So again, these 2-for-1 trades, these 3-for-2 trades, that's exactly what we want to be doing. And Dalton Kincaid is a quote unquote elite tight end, or at least has elite upside at the tight end position, who you could probably use a tight end that had a great game. Like I would rather have Dalton Kincaid very easily than Isaiah Likely for the rest of the season. And I think a lot of people would rather have Likely if they're casual fantasy players who are just looking at the box score. So if you can go Isaiah Likely, maybe even Dalton Kincaid plus back on the other side. But if you're just willing to do it straight up, you could probably get Dalton Kincaid for Likely right now, given the performance that he had.
He didn't get the targets, and we want to see him getting the targets moving forward, especially after he kind of faded away at the end of last year. I understand that was the risk. However, in terms of the snaps, in terms of the routes, he was a full-time player. Like you said, the thesis of drafting Dalton Kincaid is still intact, and in fact, may even look better knowing that, like you said, Curtis Samuel out of the offense this game, Josh Allen looking like prime Josh Allen. So if this Bills offense is a top 8 to 10 unit, these pass catchers are severely undervalued at this current point.
Yeah, absolutely. So to save us some time, Danny, I'm going to rattle off both of my sells if you want to do the same thing after we're done here. My first sell is Jameson Williams. Obviously looked great. I don't want this to come off like I'm trying to like stick to my priors on Jameson Williams because he looked a lot better than I thought he was going to. 121 yards on 8 targets, 30% target share, top 11 graded wide receiver per PFF in week 1. However, as we talk about all the time with these sells, this is about price. I am not projecting Amon-Ra and Sam Laporta to get wiped in the box score every week like they were against the Rams on Sunday Night Football in week 1. I think Jameson Williams is a solid wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 in a bad matchup play all season long. I think he's going to be a guy that is a fixture of people's flexes, maybe even a wide receiver 3 on the high end. But if you can take Jameson Williams and go up with a weight like a Jerome Ford or somebody, Brian Robinson, somebody that had a good game, J.K. Dobbins, and go after Marvin Harrison Jr., go after Chris Olave, go after even like straight up, you could probably get Amari Cooper right now for a Jameson Williams 1-for-1. DK Metcalf, maybe you could even get close to him 1-for-1 for Jameson Williams. He is the type of guy that I am going to be looking to tier up from. Again, I think he's a fine option. He definitely gained value. He's way up in my rest of season rankings than where he was before. But some of the trades you can see on the screen, I'm willing to do. If you can get Xavier Worthy straight up for Jameson Williams, I'm willing to do it. If you can get JMO plus Ramondre got you to Amon-Ra St. Brown in this deal, like definitely be willing to do some of that stuff. And same goes for Brian Robinson, who I just kind of made reference to. Again, let me preface it with Brian Robinson is a solid running back play. He's probably going to be an RB 3, but he was 24th in snap share this past week, 29th in rush attempt share. Jaden Daniels ran the ball 16 times and rushed for 2 touchdowns. That is a problem for Brian Robinson, who is obviously going to get his value as the primary ball carrier, primary red zone guy. If he's going to get sniped on the goal line like that, he is probably going to have a little bit of underwhelming performance. And if you're thinking, oh, it was a bad game script, that's why Austin Eckler played so much. No, like on early downs, they split snaps, not even just on like third down, long down, and distance stuff, because we know that's where Austin Eckler is going to get his snaps. They were on the field equally in positive and neutral game scripts during this game. So with Brian Robinson, he had a great game against a tough defense, but use him to tier up. Take Brian Robinson and Keenan Allen and go after Travis Etienne, who's on the low right now. Take Brian Robinson plus a wide receiver 3-4 like Jameson Williams, who had a good game, and go after Rashee Rice and try and buy high on somebody like that. So with those two guys, I feel good that they gained value. I feel good that they're going to be contributing fantasy players, but you want to use them to tier up. That's the thesis of this entire video.
If his value has gone from the same, round 9, round 10, early season point projection that we were drafting him as, to a guy that would, if we redrafted today, be valued in the, top 5, top 6, top 7 rounds, he now just enters the dead zone. And at that point, if he's being valued where, some of those upside wide receivers, like if we go through it, Xavier Worthy would be one that's like speaks to mind. Maybe if somebody's super desperate at running back and Worthy's like their wide receiver 4, you're able to make that type of move. Really capitalizing on part-time backs that have big-time fantasy performance is such a profitable way to play fantasy football. So although I really like Brian Robinson, if I have him in any leagues, he will be up on the trade block.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You got it. Like when you have opportunities to tier up from wide receiver 3s and RB 3s, that's what you need to do because we're trying to get better in our starting lineups. It's very like our process for trading in fantasy football is very easy. It's very simple to understand. Even the most common casual fantasy player can understand that we're taking 2 players that are, solid contributors and trying to get an elite contributor because that takes up 1 roster spot, 1 starting lineup spot as opposed to 2.
You want to consolidate into the best bet for your starting lineup. And on top of that, like you said, when you look at a big-time performance like Brian Robinson had, there are 2 things we want to look at. Do they get elite usage that can merit this type of performance consistently going forward? Or do they have such a good offense that it doesn't matter if they get that type of consistency because the exposure to the offense will lead them to scoring fantasy points? Brian Robinson has neither.
Yeah, I mean, for what it's worth, Jameson Williams could definitely have the latter, which is that he doesn't need elite usage. He can be really good because he's in a great offense. But again, this is a game environment in which Sam Laporta and Amon-Ra St. Brown had stinkers, which I don't expect to happen very often.
Yeah, and maybe for JMO specifically, you want to wait till after this week because, we were talking about it off camera, but high over-under, Tampa Bay can't cover a nosebleed.
We will not be able to cover Jameson Williams, but the other thing, too, is that we won't be able to cover Sam Laporta or St. Brown either. So it's possible that they're the ones with the big games.
No, that's definitely fair, but we'll move on to my sells before this video takes too long. The first one being Stefon Diggs, wide receiver of the Houston Texans. People have already gone into the comment sections of our rankings videos and been like, well, how were you guys fading the wide receiver 1 on the Texans? Stefon Diggs had the most fantasy points for the Texans. Stefon Diggs, you're getting prime Stefon Diggs with CJ Stroud. Like, how can you go wrong? Well, first of all, that was not nearly prime Stefon Diggs. That Stefon Diggs looked more like Cole Beasley than prime Stefon Diggs because the way they were using him in the offense, he's a guy that I view as a top 30 wide receiver rest of the season, exposure to a good offense, running the underneath routes compared to Dell and Collins working down the field. But if you're specifically going to be used as a low ADOT player, 1.7 ADOT player like Diggs was in week 1, it just simply won't cut it on most weeks because we do see Nico Collins and Tank Dell combined for 94% of the Texans' air yards. From CJ Stroud stretching the ball down the field when he needed to make a big play, it wasn't Stefon Diggs. It was Tank Dell and it was Nico Collins. They are, in my opinion, the clear 1-2 at this wide receiver position for this team. And although Stefon Diggs, like I said, does score 2 touchdowns, does provide that underneath value for this team, if you can sell him because people see 21.9 PPR points, Stefon Diggs is back going into the rest of the season, that's where I would sell Diggs. Again, in a lot of home leagues, like this is a guy that was going in like the 3rd round, early 3rd, mid 3rd for a lot of your leagues. And if you can sell even higher than that at this point because he scored 2 touchdowns, he still didn't look very efficient. He averaged like 5.5 yards per reception. Like I said, the ADOT was 1.7. Like he is the slot wide receiver of this team. And for me, it's like, especially too, if you can work up to Diggs and go up to Collins, doing that every single time. And even so, if you can get at this point Tank Dell plus for Diggs, because people know the name value of Diggs and they see the 2 touchdowns, that is another transition I would make. Because like I said, I view this to be Collins, Dell, and then Diggs, whereas some people view Diggs as the straight up 1.
Yeah, the easy thing for these trade targets is like we're buying trade targets for 2 reasons primarily. Number 1, their usage didn't match their output. We're looking at the usage. We're trying to predict what they'll be going forward. Okay, is this wide receiver 2 usage? He'll probably be a wide receiver 2 on most weeks. Down weeks, obviously, he's not going to be a wide receiver 2, but that's what we're using. And we're buying players on usage primarily, but some of them are perception. And Diggs is a perception sell because Diggs has been an elite fantasy wide receiver for years. So his perception after a big game is this is the same old Stefon Diggs we've always seen. And you can use Diggs very easily to get up to Drake London and Chris Olave and DK Metcalf and Marvin Harrison, as we talked about, and even potentially even higher. You could probably use Diggs plus a guy who also had a good week, like a Jerome Ford. You might be able to get up to Jamar Chases and Garrett Wilsons and guys like that. Like there's going to be leagues where the point production output of Stefon Diggs carries so much weight that people value him as a wide receiver 1 for the rest of the year. And again, I still think he's going to be good. I don't think he's going to be a bad player all season. He'll probably be a wide receiver 2, maybe a wide receiver 3 at worst. But use the perception of what he's been and what he produced in week 1 to get up to somebody better.
Yeah, he's the perfect candidate, like you said, for 2-for-1 deals. People are going to recognize the same name, Stefon Diggs. You attach, for example, we mentioned Brian Robinson, Jameson Williams, guy like that. Go get it after a true difference maker. Like you mentioned, that like Drake London. People are going to be aware. You might even be able to get Drake London plus for Stefon Diggs.
Oh, you might be able to. Yeah. Like Olave and London specifically, there's a very good chance that you get pluses on top of that for Stefon Diggs in some leagues. Again, don't go to the comments. Be like, that would never happen in my league. I'm talking about in most casual leagues. That is very possible. Sometimes it's very difficult for us to tell you guys what will work in your league if your league is completely different.
It's so league dependent.
Than a lot of other people's leagues. We're just trying to basically give you blanket statement here. Diggs is a good sell depending on his market price. If your league market, this is an easy rule of thumb. If we're talking about Stefon Diggs, like most people view him as a wide receiver 1, which is what is going to be the case for a lot of casual leagues, then he's a sell. If people view him as like a wide receiver 2-3 type, then he's not a sell.
Yeah, which I even still think he may be if people are more so like he's like the wide receiver 19 for the rest of the season, because I do have him comparably lower. And I actually would prefer Dell, and I don't think that's going to be a common sentiment based off what we saw in week 1. But we'll move on to another guy that really performed in week 1. Not only did he perform the best at his position. He was the highest scoring wide receiver in week 1. The unfortunate thing, he loses his quarterback on literally the last play of the game. I love Jayden Reed. I mean, if you guys have been following the content for a while throughout the offseason, like Jayden Reed has been one of my favorite wide receivers to track since the offseason. And for you, even going into the 2023 NFL draft, you were very high on Jayden Reed relative to the prospect. So we are pro Jayden Reed supporters on this channel. But the problem here is that while we are pro Jayden Reed, we are completely anti Malik Willis. And that is the big issue here. Like, we think Jayden Reed is a stud of a player, but coming off of a plus 30 PPR point performance with the talent that he showed, with the yards after catch ability that he showed, people are going to be optimistic about Reed the player. People are going to be, from a hopium standpoint, convincing themselves that Malik Willis can hold up his production while Jordan Love is out. And newsflash, it's just not going to be the case. Like, Malik Willis at this point, I don't view as an NFL caliber quarterback. And with Jordan Love slated to miss the next, 3 to 6 weeks, I believe is the reported timeline. It is an MCL sprain. I believe it is a grade 2 MCL sprain. Those things linger. I mean, even when Jordan Love comes back, even if it's close to the 3 or 4 week timeline, he's not going to have the same mobility. He's not going to have the same out of structure ability like we saw in week 1. And on top of that, like I said, when Malik Willis is starting, Jayden Reed goes from a potential top 20 wide receiver on a week-to-week basis with Jordan Love in the lineup to a guy that I'm hard-pressed to even rank in my top 40. That is the significant impact we see for Malik Willis coming into lineup. On top of that, I mean, you're still getting a guy that did not play the majority of the routes for the team. 74% of the routes, for reference, that was tied with Christian Watson for second on the team, and clearly behind Romeo Doubs, who was clear first in the team with 89%. So again, part-time player, 74% of the routes. That works when Jordan Love is your quarterback. Matt LaFleur's calling the shots, and he can scheme you those open yards after catch plays. But with Malik Willis in the lineup, like, do you even feel confident that Malik Willis would pass 200 passing yards in a week?
Yeah, I do not. The thing with Jayden Reed is everybody knows that Jordan Love is out. So I think the perception of trying to sell high on Jayden Reed doesn't really work, because
there's still the hopium factor, though.
Again, even if he was he was the number 1 receiver on the week, people probably are aware that Jordan Love is out, even the most casual fantasy players. So I think with Jayden Reed, it probably doesn't make that much sense to sell him now. What makes sense is that if he has a decent week with Malik Willis, then you sell him, because then the hopium will be stronger. Or maybe it's 2 or 3 weeks from now, he's been a wide receiver 4, wide receiver 3 at best, and then Jordan Love is slated to come back. That's when I would probably sell Jayden Reed, because then people are gonna be like, oh yeah, remember in week 1, that one game he played with Jordan Love, it was a monster game and stuff. I don't think that the perception is high enough on Jayden Reed that, like, if you look at his ECR rest of season rankings, it's wide receiver 31. That's precisely where he's ranked for me. So I feel like the balance of where Jayden Reed would have been if Jordan Love had stayed healthy versus where Jayden Reed is now because of the injury, it's kind of like he's properly valued, and you kind of just have to take the L if you have Jayden Reed, in my opinion.
And I think that's a fine overall assumption to make. However, I will say, you mentioned if he has a good game with Malik Willis. I'm hard.
He probably won't. You're right. He probably won't have a good game with Malik Willis, but he's a design touches guy. It's possible he's the one that they rely on if Malik Willis can't throw the football.
And I get that, but while there's still the hopium that he's coming off a 30 plus PPR point performance, even if people expect a downgrade going from Love to Willis, there's still going to be the factor of maybe Jayden Reed's just good enough to overcome that. And what I'm trying to say is that I don't think any receiver is going to be able to overcome Malik Willis. Heck, if Devontae Adams can't overcome Gardner Minshew, what do you think Jayden Reed's going to do with Malik Willis? Like, I think Malik Willis could very well be the worst starting quarterback in the league during his tenure with Jordan Love's out. And on top of that, the other point that I have listed here is that if you sell him now while there's still the hopium after week 1, and he does have a bad stretch of, 3-4 games, I'm even perfectly okay buying back later when Jordan Love is back. And even if that comes at a little bit of a premium based off what you sell him on, you're also getting the dead points off of your team for the next 4 weeks. Because like I said, I think Jayden Reed would be hard pressed to finish in the wide receiver 3 territory with Malik Willis throwing the rock.
Yeah, I guess I just disagree. I think that Jayden Reed is going to be probably the only one that survives while Jordan Love is out, because I think Watson and Dobbs and Wicks are doomed with their downfield.
Everyone's
dead. They're screwed. I think that Jayden Reed is still going to have carries and design targets and things of that nature. So while I don't think he's going to be great with Malik Willis, because Malik Willis sucks, I do think he's going to be the most solid of this group, and I think he has the least to lose because he is the design touches short route guy. So again, we could go back and forth on this all day. Jayden Reed, again, depending on your league market, if you can get wide receiver 2 or close to wide receiver 2 value for him, definitely go out and sell him. I just imagine that he's going to be kind of closer to the wide receiver 4 range, wide receiver 3-ish range, given the fact that Jordan Love is out. We all watched that game. It was a primetime game. If it was buried in the Sunday slate and not everyone was paying attention, it's different than if it was on Friday night, the only Friday night game I've ever seen in my fantasy football career.
Quickly mention one audible mention again, very quickly. He may not even be attainable in your league, but Jonathan Taylor does scream as a buy to me after week 1. The simple reason why is that when you look at the overall fantasy points, 10.5 PPR points, kind of inefficient in this game, that does not match the usage that he saw. He was the single biggest bell cow in week 1, 95% of the snaps, 84% of the rushing attempts, 88% of the routes. Again, he may very well not be attainable in your league, but if somebody's a little bit panicky about Jonathan Taylor, maybe they're worried about, I don't know, he doesn't look like the same JT like he did in 2021. I want to sell him now before he's at risk of potentially continuing to be inefficient. If he's being sold for like late second round price tags, that's when I'm buying in. Again, if somebody's still holding a 1-2 turn price tag on Jonathan Taylor, no, I'm not going to be buying him for that market price. But given the usage, if I can get him straight up if we're naming wide receivers in that range, we'll say, Stefon Diggs, prime example. Can you work up from Stefon Diggs to go get Jonathan Taylor right now?
Yeah, no, that's a good show for sure. I would say honorable mention for me would be Raheem Mostert, just because like people have asked me, should I drop him? So it's like he's probably free. He's a throw-in for a lot of deals. So Raheem Mostert is injured and he's going to be out Thursday. So I have that news on Raheem Mostert. It's just that he's literally almost free and he could still have the same exact projection. Like, again, has the thesis changed for Raheem Mostert? Maybe a little bit, but we thought that was going to be the case. Me and you both thought that HM was going to take a step forward.
We baked it in.
He still has 800, 900 rushing yard, 10 touchdown upside on the course of the whole season. And he might be virtually free or just a throw into a lot of people's deals right now.
And on top of that, even people might be saying in the comments, well, he's already hurt this week. Maybe Jalen Wright goes out there, has an explosive week. And now we're looking at Jalen Wright and Devon Achane being the 1-2 punch. Even if let's just say that is like the doomsday scenario if you have Mostert. Even if that were to happen, we don't think that a contending team that maybe needs a running back would probably throw the Dolphins a day 3 pick, 5th round or 6th rounder to get Raheem Mostert. Like, you don't think the Cowboys, if Dowdle and Zeke keep being inefficient, would throw a 5th or 6th rounder at a guy like Raheem Mostert? Like, there will be teams that will look at Raheem Mostert, the efficient between the tackles speed runner that he brings to the table, and will throw a day 3 pick at him. So even if it's not on the Dolphins, again, doomsday scenario, obviously we want him to be the number 2 behind Devon Achane across the full year. But even if that weren't to happen, he would be the type of asset I can see a contending team trading for.
Yeah, that's a little galaxy brain for my liking.
For sure.
But yeah, I do think I personally just think you're hopiuming on Jalen Wright. I think that Jeff Wilson will be the starter while Raheem Mostert is out, at least in the Raheem Mostert role. And then Mostert will be back probably 10 days from now. It's a chest injury. It's not a lower body injury that we have to worry about with Raheem Mostert re-aggravating it or whatever. So anyways, we're kind of rambling at this point in the video. If you guys want access to all of our rankings, our rest of season rankings are up to date on flockfantasy.com. You can check those out. You can check out the trade finder like we broke down in this video as well. You can also check out the Flock League to see the details on the Amari Cooper trade. We're going to be having a video coming out about that pretty soon. And of course, the week 2 vlog will be out next Tuesday and every Tuesday going forward. A lot of great feedback on those. If you want access to anything else, Flock Fantasy is the way to do it. If you want our weekly rankings, you can get them for free by signing up on Underdog Fantasy using the promo code FSE when you sign up, depositing $10. It'll be in your email inbox within 24 hours. Like the video if you enjoyed, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.